Just a minute, I'm sharing my screen. Okay, I hope now it is visible to you all. Okay, so we started with the basic concepts of thermodynamics yesterday, and we started with the different types of systems. Okay, open system and closed system. And then we talked about isolated and adiabatic system. Okay, and we also talked about homogeneous and heterogeneous system. So in a homogeneous system, you should be able to treat whatever you have in the system as a single constituent. Okay, and the key word is it is a single constituent. Okay, they retain their chemical um, composition. Okay, they are not individual chemical compositions, they are all treated as a single chemical composition, so they all exhibit the same property. Okay, then it is a homogeneous system. If there are, if those molecules or those components which are present in a mixture, if they exhibit independent properties, then we call them as heterogeneous system. We discussed this yesterday. Okay, then we talked about macroscopic approach and microscopic approach. So if we are taking the time averaged of some property, then we call it as a macroscopic approach. Okay, we are not looking at the molecular level, it is a time averaged property. Okay, so such a field of thermodynamics is called as classical thermodynamics. In microscopic approach, we look at the molecular level, so large number of molecules are present, so you require large number of variables. That makes the approach complex, so you need probability and statistics. So that is why it is called as statistical thermodynamics. Okay, and we talked about working fluid, which is nothing but a carrier of energy. And I asked this question and people were able to tell us, so what are all the conditions that makes a property, a variable a property? So we have discussed this also yesterday. And what would be new to you is this exact differential. The rest you would have done in your introduction to mechanical sciences. So this a property is an exact or perfect differential is, it should be something new to you. Okay, and we saw what an exact differential is yesterday. Okay, so some people said it was a little bit difficult to follow. Okay, so what I'll do is uh, I'll open I'll open another window. It's not opening, just a minute. Yeah, okay. Okay, what we saw yesterday was we took three variables. Okay, we said a function of x, y, and z is equal to 0. Okay, right? Okay, and then what we said is if z is a function of, or z depends on x and y. Okay, it could be other way also. X would depend on y and z, y would depend on x and z. What we are taking is z is dependent on x and y. Okay, so what we said was if I want to find a change in z, okay, that would be dependent on the change in x as well as the change in y. So how we do is we go for partial differentiation. So what we write is partial z partial x. Okay, while we say, what we try to find out here is what is the change in z for the corresponding change in x. Okay, and how do we do that? We do that by keeping y constant. So we write it as partial z partial x at constant y multiplied by dx. Okay, this is the first term. Okay, the second term is what is the change in z for a corresponding change in y. Okay, for the corresponding change in y. How do we do that? By keeping x constant and we multiply it with dy. And you would have done this even in your +2 max, I believe. Okay, so this is how we find the change in z. Now what I do is this term dou x by dou z by dou x at constant y, this term I replace with m. Okay, and this term I replace with n. Okay, so what we have is dz is equal to m dx plus n dy. Okay, so dz is m dx plus n dy. Just to replace the first order of the differential term, we have replaced the first order of the differential term with m and n respectively. Okay, is that clear? So now what we say is for this equation dz is equal to m dx plus n dy, if there is a solution, if there is a solution for this equation which I have written in red color, dz equal to m dx plus n dy, the dz equal to m dx plus n dy அப்படின்ற ஈக்குவேஷனுக்கு சொல்யூஷன் இருந்தா then it is called exact differential. இந்த dz equal to m dx plus n dy அப்படின்ற ஈக்குவேஷனுக்கு சொல்யூஷன் இல்லைன்னா it is called an inexact or imperfect differential. Okay, so this is the condition for your exact or inexact differential. Okay, so let me clean this, or eraser, how it erases, I haven't checked. Okay, it is erasing everything. Okay, that is fine. So what we have now, we have the equation dz equal to m dx plus n dy. Okay, so that is the equation for which we need the solution. Okay, so m dx plus n dy, this is the equation that we have. For this, if there is a solution, you have the different exact differential. If there is no solution, then it is inexact differential. But how do I know whether there is an exact, whether there is a solution or not? So what we do is, we are going to say what was shown in the previous slide was, okay, what was shown in the previous slide was, let me see if I can share that. So now is the, if this is the slide visible to you right now? One of you can say yes. Is the slide visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So what we said yesterday was, see, if you look at this, if the variable z is to be adequately defined by the thermodynamic coordinates x and y, the value of z must be the same, irrespective of the order taken in approaching it. Okay. So let me go to this open board. So what was this m? This m was actually partial z, partial x at constant y. This was your m, right? And similarly, your n was partial z, partial y at constant x. So that is at constant x. Okay. So now what is this slide saying you? So if it is to be defined by the thermodynamic coordinates, if z is to be defined by the coordinates x and y, the value of z must be the same irrespective of the order taken in approaching it. Okay. So what we do is, we are going to differentiate these two terms again. Okay. Partial z, partial x at constant y, and partial z, partial y at constant x. Okay. So what we do is, so if I differentiate this again with the reference to y, okay, so if I differentiate this with the reference to y, what I'll have is partial y of partial z, partial x. Okay. Similarly, if I differentiate this term with a reference to x, because we have already differentiated with respect to y, so now I am differentiating it with reference to x. If I differentiate it with reference to x, I already have partial z, partial y inside. Okay. So in max, we can also write this as dou squared z, right? So the numerator, you have two partial terms, so you call it as dou squared divided by partial y, partial x. And now I can write this as partial squared z, partial x, partial y. Okay. What the slide is telling us is, in this particular side, okay, let me change the color. So in this particular side, we first differentiated this z with respect to x, right? So in the sideline, our first z we differentiated with respect to x, and then we differentiated this z with respect to y. Okay. What about this side? Here we differentiated z with respect to y first, and then we differentiated with reference to x. So that is the order of differentiation. So that is what the slide is telling you. So it should be possible to make the changes in either sequence without changing the result. So even if I am differentiating with reference to y, with reference to x and then with reference to y, or with reference to y and then with reference to x, if both of them are equal, okay, dou squared z by dou y by dou x is equal to dou squared z by dou x by dou y. There is no change in the numerator, right? The numerator is nothing but the change in z. But how was the change made? First, it was differentiated with respect to x, then it was differentiated with respect to y. Here first it was differentiated with reference to y, then it was differentiated with reference to x. I have changed the order, but even after changing the order, if I am getting the same value for both of these, then I have a solution for this particular equation, dz equal to mdx plus ndy. Okay, and what is this dou z by dou x? That is nothing but m. What is this dou z by dou y? That is nothing but n. That is why we are saying dou m by dou y, and this was done at constant x. Dou m by dou y at constant x. That is equal to dou n by dou x at constant y. So this is the condition for exact or inexact differential. If both of them are equal, then a particular variable is an exact differential, or else that variable is an inexact differential. Okay, is that clear now? So if still any of you is having a doubt, you can raise it now. So still having any doubts on this exact or inexact differential, or have I made it clear?
Yes, sir.
So I'll take that it is clear for everyone. Okay, so we will move on. So what we will do is we will take up a problem. Okay, so you can take down this problem. You can write this problem in your notebook. If the pressure P, specific volume V, and absolute temperature T. So we have pressure, volume, and temperature are functionally related as, if the pressure, specific volume, and absolute temperature are functionally related as V by T dP plus P by T dV. V by T dP plus P by T dV. Examine whether the quantity is a property or not. Examine whether the quantity is a property or not. Okay. So those who are familiar, you can go ahead and solve this. Others, you can just follow me. Okay. So we know what is the condition. What is the condition? Yes.
The problem screen is not visible, sir. The PPT is not visible.
It's not visible.
No, sir. The whiteboard is only visible, sir.
Oh, okay. Just a minute then. Just a minute. So is it visible now? Is the slide visible now?
No,
No,
sir.
sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay, what I'll do is I'll stop presenting and then I'll present again. Is is it visible now? It should be, I hope.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes, sir. Yes,
okay,
sir.
okay, fine. Okay. So if you have not taken down the problem, write down the equation alone. V by T dP plus P by T dV. So that is the given term, V by T dP plus P by T dV. So for this term, we are supposed to find whether it is a property or not. Those who are able to solve it, go ahead and try solving it on your own. Others, you can follow me. Okay, dz is equal to mdx plus ndy. Okay, dz is equal to mdx plus ndy. So this is d. Okay, or so now what is given to us is v by t dp. What we have is v by t dp plus p by t dv. Okay, that is what is given to us. Now, as I told you, you can find what are the similarities. Okay, so your m is similar to v by t, your x is similar to p, your n is similar to p by t, and your y is similar to v. Okay, so you can write m is similar to v by t, x is similar to p, n is similar to p by t, and y is similar to v, small v. Okay, so what is the condition? The condition is partial m, partial x at constant y should be equal to partial and partial y at constant x. So let's proceed with what is this partial x here. So that is nothing but partial of v by t. X here is partial p. So I'm supposed to differentiate v by t with reference to p. With reference to p, v and t both are constants. So this is supposed to be equal to 0. Right? Okay. The next term is, so let me hide this. Then we have partial n, partial y, at constant x.
Sir, partial u, partial y, sir.
Yeah. You're right. Good. I made a mistake here. Yes, you're right.
Okay, sir.
So, do we have an eraser here or something? This is for moving. So this fellow is actually partial y. Okay.
At constant x, sir.
Yes. The problem is I can't. I have to erase everything, I think. That is the problem here. It is changed. Okay, guys, just a minute. I think it's clearing. Is the board visible to you? Is the board visible to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let me try this. I don't know how it will work. Let me try.
Okay, sir.
What I am writing, you are able to see dz equal to mdx plus ndy. It's also very, very light. Are you able to see this?
See,
Uh,
actually, it is blurred, sir.
it's
Like
blurred.
it's not clearly visible, sir.
Okay, just a minute. Now everything is gone, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So this won't work. Okay, let's see what can be done. So we have no other option. We have to go with that. A couple of classes will be like this. Then once we find what is to be done, then it will be easy. So you have to bear with me till then. There is no erasing option here. Eraser. So I'll write it with a different color. So this is partial m, partial y at constant x. Okay. So this one does not change. So it is v by t. So instead of y, what we have here is partial v. Okay. So if we are differentiating v by t with reference to v, okay, 1 by t is a constant. And if we differentiate v with respect to v, that is 1. So what you'll have is 1 by t. Okay. So partial m, partial y at constant x would be 1 by t. Okay. Partial n, partial x at constant y. Sorry about that. So that would be partial of p by t by partial x is p. So if you differentiate p with respect to p, that would be 1, and 1 by t is a constant. So in both the cases, we have got 1 by t. So what we get is partial m, partial y at constant x is equal to partial n, partial y x this is x at constant y. So that makes it a property. So the last statement, you should write it as a statement. So V by T into dP plus P by T into dV is a property. Okay, if I write that, that will take another 2 minutes. Okay, so you can write that as a sentence. So once you conclude,
Hello?
yes, yes,
Sir, the what you wrote on the screen is not in the
nothing
screen
is
you
visible.
are presenting. Again, your face is only showing.
So we are seeing only your faces again.
Oh, just a minute then. Is this visible now?
Yes, sir. It's coming, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the last statement should be V by T into dP plus P by T into dV is a property. Okay, so whenever a question is given, conclude it. Okay, write it as a statement. Write it as a statement and say, yes, the given quantity is a property. Okay, only then the problem gets completed. If that statement is not there, then your answer is still incomplete. Okay, so I hope you guys have understood this. Okay. So I'll just give a minute for someone who may want to copy these steps. Okay, so let's proceed. Okay, up to this, we saw yesterday intrinsic and extrinsic properties, intensive and extensive properties. So that which depends on the extent of the system, we call it as extensive property, which means if you are splitting a space into two, and if the properties also their values changes, if the value of the property changes, then that is called an extensive property. If the value of the property does not change when you change the extent of the system, then those properties are called intensive properties. The way when we mean extent, we can also mean mass. So if it is dependent on mass, then it is extensive. If it is independent of mass, then it is intensive. Okay, so up to this we have seen yesterday. So in today's class, we will talk about some basic fundamental terminologies which you should know, and maybe you would have done this in your introduction to mechanical sciences itself. Okay, the very same example which we took for the closed system I have shown here. Okay, which is nothing but a cylinder piston arrangement. Okay, so what I have shown here is, see, some amount of gas is trapped inside this particular cylinder. Okay, so when we talked about open system, we said there is 1 kg of oxygen inside this cylinder. Okay, so let's retain the same. So I have 1 kg of oxygen inside the cylinder. Okay, and it is in a compressed state because the piston has been pushed downwards and it has compressed oxygen. Okay, so that is a state of the system. Okay, so which means at point number 1 what I have is 1 kg and the volume is less, which means maybe the volume is 0.5 meter cube. Okay, yesterday also we saw a similar example. Okay, the volume here is 0.5 meter cube. Okay, the volume here is 0.5 meter cube. The pressure, let's say it is 1 bar. Okay, the pressure is 1 bar and the volume is 0.5 meter cube. So here your V1 is going to be 0.5 meter cube and the pressure P1 is 1 bar. Okay, that is what I call as the state of a system. Okay, so if you are able to define something, if you are able to define a system with certain properties, then that is called as the state of a system. So you are defining the condition of a system, of a thermodynamic system. Okay, characterized by certain properties. So in this particular case I have just mentioned pressure and volume. By mentioning pressure and volume I am able to define the state of the system. Okay, so if you are able to define a condition of a system, that is called the state of the system. Okay, we have seen this yesterday also in some other examples which we have seen. Okay, a path. Okay, so a locus of a series of states, which means, see, at just like the previous case, in the previous case you had 1 to 2, right? So the direction is like this. You are moving from 1 to 2. Okay, so is the case here. So 1 to 2, it has taken a path A. Okay, that is what we have seen in this particular diagram. It is moving from 1 to 2, which means there is an expansion. Expansion in the sense there is an increase in volume and a decrease in pressure. So that is what you can see in the next picture also. So there is an increase in volume. So volume has increased along the x-axis and your pressure has decreased along the y-axis, right? That is what it has done when you moved from 1 to 2. From 2 to 1, you are compressing it again. Okay, but here also they have shown from 1 to 2, but the path is different. Okay, so what we are trying to say here is, okay, when I move from 1 to 2, I have defined one state 1 and another state 2. Okay, what about this particular position? I'll take another color, probably black, or I'll take green. What about this particular point? What about this particular point? What about this particular point? This particular point also has got a pressure. This particular point also has got a volume, right? This particular point also has got a pressure and this particular point also has got a volume. So similarly, you can have so many states between 1 and 2. And if I connect all these states, that gives me the path. That is what they are saying, a locus of a series of states through which a system passes between initial state and final state. Initial state is 1 and final state is 2, and that is called a path. Okay, so a path comprises a large number of states, and if you are able to connect all these state points, you get a path. Okay, I hope you understand. So your path exists between the initial state and the final state. This is something like a map. Okay, a map which shows you the route. Okay, now when you go, there are so many apps. You have got Ola cab or Uber cab, and you can see the map there. Okay, you have got the starting point and you have got the ending point, and your map will show you the route through which your car is supposed to follow. Okay, or you have your own Google Maps. If you want to go to a new location, you just enter the destination and you just go by following the map, right? So the starting point is your house maybe and the ending point is some place that you want to go. Okay, so you are passing through so many points for so many locations, and that makes a path. So similarly here also, when you move from initial state to final state, you have so many state points, and if you connect all of them, that makes a path. Okay, a process. Okay, you can take the previous picture itself. So this 1 to 2, when I moved from, where is it? Okay, sorry. Okay, so when you move from 1 to 2, when you move from 1 to 2, okay, when you move from 1 to 2, that is a process by path A. And when you move from 1 to 2 by path B, that is another process. So this is one process, this is one process, and this is another process. Okay, so your process will be different, your processes can be different even if the initial and the final state points are same. Then what makes a process? So if you are able to transform from one state to another state, that is called a process. If your state points can change, if the state of the system can change from one condition to another condition, it is a simple example can be heating of water. Initially it was at room temperature. When I supplied heat to it, okay, it has raised its temperature, the temperature has raised to 100 degrees centigrade. Okay, so from 30 degrees centigrade to 100 degrees centigrade, so that is a process. Okay, so the transformation of a thermodynamic system, so moving from one state to another state, from one state to another state is called a process. And there are different types of processes. So some examples I have given you here: flow process and non-flow process. What is a flow process? A process that takes place in an open system is called a flow process. A process that takes place in a closed system is called non-flow process. Simple points you can write: flow process, a process that takes place in an open system; non-flow process, a process that takes place in a closed system. Okay, quasi-static process, we will talk about it in detail. What is this quasi-static process? A quasi-static process is a near equilibrium process. It is called a near equilibrium process. A near equilibrium process. Where has it gone? Here it is. A near equilibrium process. EQUILIBRIUM If you keep on writing like this, then all the time will go. So it's a near equilibrium process. What is a near equilibrium process? That we need the definition of the next two processes: reversible versus irreversible process. Okay, you would have studied in your chemistry what is a reversible equation and an irreversible equation. In a reversible equation, if the reactants go to the fetch you some products, and if the products can combine again and give you the reactants, then that is called a reversible equation. Okay, an irreversible equation is if the reactants, they undergo a chemical reaction and they give you a product, but those products cannot give back the reactants, then we call it as an irreversible equation. Okay, but a thermodynamic definition of reversible and irreversible process is a little bit different. Okay, so let me give you an example. Okay, say suppose I have a vessel of water. Okay, I have a vessel of water which is at 30 degrees centigrade. Okay, now what I do is I just heat it. I heat it by some means, and I raise the temperature of water to 100 degrees centigrade. Okay, initially it was 30. Okay, now it is 100. Initially it was 30 and now it has gone to 100. Okay, now what I do is I have heated it. I have heated the water from 30 degrees centigrade to 100 degrees centigrade. Now what I do is I just place that 100 degrees centigrade water on a table and I switch on a fan. Okay, what will happen after some time? This 100 degrees centigrade will once again become 30 degrees centigrade. I heated it from 30 degrees centigrade to 100 degrees centigrade. Now I have cooled it so that it becomes or comes back to 30 degrees centigrade. So this is a reversible process. Is that correct? So can any one of you tell me whether it is correct or wrong? So is this a reversible process? Kaushik, maybe Kaushik can answer.
Yes, sir. But while heating, there will be change in the quantity. Will that affect the thing?
Some amount of water. No, I have not. I have just raised the temperature from 30 to 100. I have not allowed the water to become steam.
Okay, so then we can say that it is said to be reversible, sir.
It is said to be a reversible process, right? So
Yes.
logically, it is a reversible process. That is what everyone of us will think. Okay, thank you, Kaushik. Okay, but one doubt from Kaushik was whether some amount of water will be lost in as vapor or not. So what I do is, so to counter his argument, I have said I'm not heating it to 100. I'm just heating it to 90. So at 90, you will not allow the water to become steam, right? So it is just sensible heat. You are just raising the temperature of water to 90 degrees centigrade, and then 90 to 30. And so now you are convinced that it is a reversible process. Okay, but it is not a reversible process. I'll tell you why. Okay, what we did was you concentrated only on the system. The system was taken from 30 degree to 90 degree, and the system is brought back from 90 degree to 30 degree. Okay, fine. What about the surrounding? What about the surrounding? If you take the first scenario, I actually supplied some amount of energy in the form of heat. Maybe an LPG gas stove I used to heat it. So some amount of gas has been spent. So some amount of chemical energy has been converted into heat energy, and that was utilized to raise the temperature of water. Okay, correct? And then what I do, I simply put it on a table. I didn't even switch on the fan. What happened was, by normal thermal equilibrium condition, slowly the temperature was lost to the surroundings. So it would have automatically heated the surrounding air, correct? Okay. And then it has attained 30 degrees centigrade. My question is, when we supplied this heat in the form of LPG gas, okay, that was the surrounding in the initial state. Is there any reversible thing that has happened to that LPG gas by bringing this 90 degree back to 30 degree? When I brought this 90 degree back to 30 degree, did the LPG gas that was used in heating it from 30 degree to 90 degree also came back into the cylinder? No, it didn't, right? It was consumed, right? So the change in the surrounding has not reversed back. It has not come back to its initial state. Only the system has come back to its initial state. The surroundings did not come back to its initial state. Okay, so thermodynamically speaking, a reversible process is a process only when the system and the surrounding comes back to its initial state or to its original state. Okay, so both the system as well as the surrounding should come back to its initial state. Is that possible in nature? Not at all. So none of the processes in nature will be reversible. All processes in nature are irreversible process. We know that energy cannot be destroyed or energy cannot be created. Though it is transformed from one form to another form, once some energy is consumed, it is consumed. That's all. You can't get that energy in that form back. It has already converted into another form. Okay, so that has got some impact in the surrounding. Okay, so your system and the surrounding should come back to its original state in a reversible process, but that process is never going to take place in nature. It will never take place in nature. Okay, If you find a reversible process, you will be a great scientist, greatest scientist, even greater than Einstein. Okay, but that is not going to happen. Okay, so that is something you should always keep in mind. The moment you say reversible process, immediately you should say system as well as surrounding should come back to its original state. Okay, but what we will do is in some of the terminologies that we'll be using later on, we will be talking about reversible processes. That is only theoretical processes. Those will be treated as references, okay, standards to compare one process with another process. The maximum energy or work can be done is in case of a reversible process. So we will take that as a reference, but such a process is not existing, but we will take it as a reference so that we will be able to attain a higher efficiency in case of cycles. Don't worry, we will talk about it later. We will discuss that when we talk about entropy, so don't worry about that. And then we have adiabatic process. An adiabatic process is a process in which there is no heat transfer. So if there is no heat entering into or leaving the system, and if the system is undergoing a process, such a system undergoing a process is called adiabatic process, and the system is called an adiabatic system. And this you should be familiar with. Isothermal, if the process takes place at constant temperature, it is called isothermal. If the process takes place at constant pressure, it is called isobaric. At constant volume, it is called isochoric. Okay, and these two, some of you may be familiar and some of you may not be familiar. Isenthalpic is constant enthalpy, and isentropic is constant entropy. Entropy is also a property which is defined based on the second law of thermodynamics, and we will be doing that in our unit 3. Third unit, we will be doing it. And when we discuss about heat transfer, work and heat transfer, I'll introduce that a little bit so that you can have a feel of what that property is all about. So when you move a system from one state to another state, that transformation is called a process. Okay. Then cycle. Cycle is very simple. You have a starting point, and if you start from one point and come back to the same point, then that makes a cycle. Okay, you are undergoing a series of processes, but start from one point. If you are able to get back to the same point, then that makes a cycle. And the example I have shown here is your Otto cycle, which you will be doing in applied thermodynamics next semester. Okay, so you have 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the PV diagram, and you have the TS diagram as well. So 1, 2 is isentropic compression. You can see whenever I say compression, there is a reduction in volume. So you'll be moving towards the left. And 2, 3 is constant volume heat addition. So when there is a heat addition, there is an increase in temperature as well as increase in pressure. So that is why the pressure is raised. Then expansion. There is a drop in pressure and there is an increase in volume. And there is heat rejection, which means temperature drops down, pressure also drops down. So 4-1 is constant volume heat rejection. Okay, so you can see it has started from 1. So it has started from this point 1. It has gone, it has taken 4 processes, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, and 4, 1. 4 processes it has taken place, and in the 4th process, it has come back to its original state 1. So if you are starting from one state and if you are coming back to the same state, then it is called a cycle. Okay. And we have point function and path function. Okay, we have already discussed about this when we did property. Okay, when I say point function, you see, so this is a point. So this is point 1 and this is point 2. And to move from point 1 to point 2, you have taken a path, right? So for point 1, you have a particular value P1, and for point 1, you have a particular value V1. So the moment I fix a point, then there is a particular value for the pressure and a particular value for volume. The moment I fix the point 2, there is a particular volume value for pressure P2. So there is a particular pressure value here. That value is not going to change. And there is a corresponding value V2, which is volume V2. Okay. So when a system undergoes a change from one state to another, the properties of the system also change. This we know, which depends on the end states. So I am moving from 1 to 2, okay, by this path. But the moment I say I move from 1 to 2, the focus immediately shifts on 1 and 2. Okay, this is like traveling from one city to another city. Okay, I am traveling from Coimbatore to Chennai. Okay, there are so many cities in between, or so many towns in between. Okay, but I am not worried about all those local or small destinations. What I'm worried about is the starting point is Coimbatore, the ending point is Chennai. Okay, so irrespective of what path I take, okay, one person, he starts from Coimbatore, he goes to Madurai, then he goes back to Chennai. This is one path he has taken. Another person has traveled from Coimbatore to Salem, and then he has gone to Chennai. This is another path. Irrespective of the path taken, the starting point is still Coimbatore and the ending point is still Chennai. Similarly, irrespective of what path you take, if the starting point and the ending point is representing the same states, that is what is called as a point function. Okay, so that is what is also called as a property. So if you look at it, we have already drawn this diagram in a PV plane. So pressure volume diagram, which means pressure is also a property and volume is also a property, and it is represented by a point. Okay, and usually point functions are exact differentials. If you remember the slide which we have seen before, in exact differential, you would have seen this term. The last statement was, your if something is an exact differential, then that is a point function. You can refer back to the slide. The last statement is, an exact differential is also a point function. Okay, so how we represent it is dp or dv. What is dp? Change in pressure. The change in pressure is final state minus initial state, so that is P2 minus P1. Okay, dV is V2 minus V1. Okay, so am I worried about the in-between points? I'm not at all worried about the in-between points. I'm only worried about the final point and the initial point. There might be so many state points in between, but I'm worried about what is the change from where I have started. So it is final state minus initial state. So if I'm able to write something as final state minus initial state, then that change can be attributed to a point function. Okay, so now the change in pressure. What is the change in pressure? The change in pressure is nothing but P2 minus P1. So if P2 is 1 bar and P1 is 2 bar, what is P2 minus P1? In this case, it is negative because there is a drop in pressure, right? The pressure has dropped. So 1 minus 2 minus 1 bar. That minus sign represents decrease in pressure. So there is a decrease in pressure of 1 bar. What about the change in volume? Say suppose this is 2 meter cube and this is 1 meter cube. What is the change in volume? V2 minus V1, 2 minus 1, which is 1 meter cube. Here there is an increase in volume, so the change is positive. Okay, so there is an increase in volume, so 1 meter cube. Okay, I hope it is clear to you. If at all you have any doubts, then and there you can unmute yourself and you can just ask any question that you want. You need not wait till I finish. Okay, so hope it is clear to you. Path function. Okay, so path function is nothing but, see, I have moved from state point 1 to 2, okay, using this particular direction. Okay, I have taken a path A. I have taken a path A and I have traveled from 1 to 2. Let me call this as a pressure volume diagram. Okay, and you can see I have drawn some hatched lines below this curve. Okay, and now I have to tell you that, so whenever there is a PV diagram, okay, the area under the curve of the PV diagram indicates the work done during the process 1-2. It can be either the work done by the system or it can be work done on the system. Irrespective of whether it is work done by the system or on the system, area under the curve will give you work transfer. Okay, we will discuss this much more detail when we talk about work transfer and heat transfer. Here just an introduction to those topics. Okay, because I have traveled through the path 1, 2, area under the curve gives me the work transfer for the process 1 to 2. So we usually write it as W suffix 1, 2. Okay. Now what I want to tell you is the area under the curve gives you the work transfer W12. Okay. Now let me change the color. Let me take green. Okay. And for my convenience, I will take another path like this, which is actually I have taken a constant pressure heat addition, and then I have a constant volume heat rejection. Okay, so I have moved from 1 to 2 using this green color line. Okay, now what I want to show you is the area under the curve has now increased. Can you see? The area under the curve has now increased. Previously, it was only under the path A. Now it is this entire rectangle, right? The area under the curve has increased now, which means now, so I'll call this path as B. Both are W1 to 2. So initially, when I used, so this one, I'll call it as WB, area under the curve 1, 2. By following the path B, I'll call it as WB. And previously, we used this red color, so I'll call this as WA, area under the curve 1, 2. By following the path A gives you WA. And by common sense and by looking at the picture, we will be able to say that WB is greater than WA because the area under the curve 1, 2 by following the path B is greater than the area under the curve 1, 2 by following the path A. Is that clear? Okay. So now what we see is, see, point number 1 and point number 2, they are fixed. They are point functions. There is no change in point 1 and point 2. What about dP? Is there any change in the value of dP when I go from 1 to 2 using the path B? By using the path B also, your dP is still P2 minus P1. By following the path A also, your dP is P2 minus P1. Okay, so your dP is not dependent on the path. Your dP is dependent on the points 1 and 2. Similarly, if you look at dV, there is no change when you take the path B or when you take the path A. Both of them will give you V2 minus V1, correct? So your P and V, they are dependent only on the points 1 and 2. Let me write this. Okay, I'll hide this. So can I write dW is equal to W2 minus W1? Is it possible to write it like this? Can I write it like this? I can't write it like this. This is wrong. Why? Your work is not dependent on 1 and 2. Your work is dependent on the paths A and path B. If you are following the path A, your W12 is WA, lesser work. If you are following path B, okay, your work is WB, which is greater than WA. So your work is dependent on your work is not dependent on 1 and 2. It is not dependent on the end points or the initial point. It is dependent on the path followed. The same example, the travel example you can take. Okay, so if you are going from one city to another city, if you are going from one city to another city, okay, by two different paths. By two different paths, the petrol that you spend, okay, depending upon the petrol that you spend, the amount of energy that you are spending is also
டேய் ஒன்றும் இல்லைண்ணா. ஆக்சுவலி எங்க ஏரியா பக்கம் தான் சேரும். லைக் எங்க கிரிட்ல இருக்கிற கரண்ட் வந்து கட் பண்ணிட்டாங்க. அதனால மேபி சாரோட கம்ப்யூட்டர் ஆஃப்ல இருக்கலாம்.
பாரு எவ்வளவு பொறுப்பா
ஓகேடா.
இருக்காரு.
தேங்க்யூ ஃபார் த கைண்ட் இன்ஃபர்மேஷன்.
ஒன்றும் இல்லை, கரெக்டா இங்க கரண்ட் எனக்கு ஆஃப் ஆகும்போது அவரோட வாய்ஸ் கட் ஆச்சு. அதான் அவர் வேற பக்கத்துல இருந்து இருக்கேன் அப்படிங்கிற மாதிரி சொன்னாரா, அதான்.
ரைட்ரா ரைட்ரா.
ம்.
Convert Robinson, continue teaching.
சாத்து
ரெப் நடத்துறா.
மிஸ்டர் எம் நந்தகுமார் இருக்காருடா, கண்டினியூ பண்ணுவாரு.
நந்தகுமார் கௌசிக்லாம் இருக்கும்போது என்ன பிடிச்ச இது பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கீங்க? கௌசிக் நந்தகுமார் அவர் என்ன இருக்கிறாங்க?
ராபிடே வாடா பப்ஜி ஆடலாம்.
அவ்வளவுதான் இருக்கேன், வாடா.
மீட்டிங் ரெக்கார்ட் ஆயிட்டு இருக்குடா. மீட்டிங் ரெக்கார்ட் ஆயிட்டு இருக்கு.
இங்க பாட்டு ஸ்ட்ரீம் பண்ணி விட்டுறாதீங்க.
விக்னேஷ் ஒரு டிடிஎம் ஸ்ட்ரீம் பண்றா.
டேய் மீட்டிங் ரெக்கார்ட் ஆயிட்டு இருக்குடா.
டேய் ரெப்பு டேய் அவருக்கு ஃபோன் பண்ணி கேளுடா, லெஃப்ட் ஆகலாம் வாங்காது கேளுடா.
கேக்குறேன்டா. ஐயோ இவர் நம்பர் வேற என்கிட்ட இல்லையே. ஓ குரூப்ல இருக்க எடுத்துக்கிறேன் விடு.
குரூப்ல போய் பாருடா.
சேரா சேரா. அப்படியே கேட்டேன்டா, அவர் வந்து மறுபடியும் ரீஜாயின் பண்றேன் அப்படிங்கிற மாதிரி சொல்லியிருந்தாரு, இன்ஃபார்ம் பண்றேன்னாரு.
தென் இப்போ மீட்டிங் லெஃப்ட் ஆயிடலாமாடா?
அப்படியே தானே இருக்க சொன்னாரு. அவர் வந்து எதா இருந்தாலும் வந்து லைக் இன்ஃபார்ம் பண்றேன் அப்படிங்கிற மாதிரி சொன்னாரு.
ஓகே.
Slides are visible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what we said was, so now we will not be able to say that dw is w2 minus w1. Okay, because your change in the work, it doesn't depend on the endpoints 1 and 2. It depends on the path taken. Okay, so just like I said, dw is not w2 minus w1. The same thing can be done with reference to heat transfer also. You can just make a note of it, and we will be discussing this separately. So instead of this P, if I have T in the y-axis, and instead of this V, if I have entropy, okay, yes, which we also call as the TS diagram. The PV diagram will give you the work transfer. The TS diagram will give you the heat transfer. So just like your W12, area under the curve 1, 2 in TS plane will give you heat transfer. Okay, if you follow the path A, you will get QA in a TS diagram. So if you follow the path B, you will get QB. So just like the previous case, your QB is greater than QA. So you cannot write dq as q2 minus q1. Your heat transfer also depends on the path followed. So those parameters or those variables which depend on the path followed, the direction, then those parameters are called as path functions. And these path functions are not properties. These path functions are not exact differentials. Okay, so we always represent or denote them by using this delta symbol. Many a times I miss where this, here it is. It is denoted by delta. So we don't call it as dw, we will call it as delta w. If at all we call it as dw, we will write it as dw, and what we will do is we will put a dash over this dw. You will strike this d here. That is your dw. So this d represents inexact differential or imperfect differential. Okay, so you can either call it as delta w or this dw, or you can call it as delta q or this dq with a dash over it to represent that it is an imperfect or inexact differential. Is that clear? Okay, so that is your path function. Then there is something called a quasi-static process. I said it is a near equilibrium process. Okay, the moment I say near equilibrium, then we also need to know what equilibrium is. Okay, so let's take an example. Okay, so what I have done is I have shown a cylinder piston arrangement here. Okay, so what I have done is, so this is your piston. Okay, this fellow is your piston here. So over the piston, I have added so many weights. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 weights I have added. And I have pushed the piston in the downward direction. So now the gas trapped inside the cylinder is under the piston is in a compressed state. So that is the initial state. Okay, so the initial state is in a compressed state, so the volume is less and the pressure is more. Volume is less and the pressure is more, so it is in a compressed state. Okay, what I do is I first remove the first weight. When I remove the first weight, your piston will move slightly up. Okay, from this position the piston has slightly moved up. Okay, then I remove the second weight. I have removed this weight also. Then the piston has moved further up. Then I remove this green weight also. Then it has moved up. Then I remove the black weight and it has come to its final state. What I do by removing the weights is, when I remove the first weight, the gas has pushed the piston to a new state. And before I remove the second weight, what happens is every gas or every gas molecule inside it, they attain an equilibrium state, which means they come to some sort of an equilibrium state, which means the pressure and the temperature is balanced inside. Okay, and then when I remove it, okay, which means when I remove the first weight, it has come to this state point 2. So I can say it has attained a pressure P2 and it has attained a volume V2. Okay, and then what I do is I remove the next weight. It is not a free expansion. I do not remove everything suddenly so that there is a sudden movement of piston from the downward direction to the upward direction. That is not happening. I am removing it slowly. One by one, I am removing the weight. When I do that, when I remove the first weight, everything inside attains an equilibrium state. Then I remove the next weight. Then it attains the equilibrium state. So what happens is, between 1 and 2, equilibrium is maintained. Then between 2 and 3, when I attain 3, that is also an equilibrium state. When I attain 4, that is also an equilibrium state. So as I move from 1 to 5, I move through a series of equilibrium states. Then such a process is called quasi-static process. Okay, the same thing can be done in the reverse way also. So when the piston is like this, when it is in the final state, if I add one weight to it, the black weight is added. Okay, then it goes to 4. Then the green weight is added, then it goes to 3. Then the orange color weight is added, then it goes to 2. Then the brown weight is added, it goes to 1. Okay, so what they say is it is a near reversible process also, but not technically reversible. When I say technically reversible, both the system as well as the surroundings should be reversible. Only then we can call it as a reversible. But what we say is it will follow the same path back by adding weights one after the other. The surrounding is not going to come back to its initial state, but as I move from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and 4 to 5, it can go from 5 to 4, 4 to 3, 3 to 2, and 2 to 1. The system can be reversed, but the surroundings cannot be reversed. Such a process is called a quasi-static process. And what we said was, in all these intermediate states, 2, 3, 4, equilibrium was maintained. Okay, so if equilibrium is maintained in these intermediate state points, then such a process is called quasi-static process. Okay, then what is this equilibrium? That is the next question, right? So what is that equilibrium? Okay, some explanation is given here for quasi-static process. So when a process proceeds in such a manner that the system remains infinitesimally close. When I say infinitesimally close to equilibrium, the actual equilibrium cannot be attained, but very near to equilibrium, then that is called a quasi-static process. Very near, that is what we call it as infinite. Infinite is infinitely large, we can say, or infinitely small. So that infinitesimally close is similar to infinitely small. Okay, so infinitesimally close to equilibrium state. Okay, so in every intermediate state, the system adjusts itself internally so that the properties in one part of the system does not change any faster than the other part. So everywhere inside the cylinder, the property is maintained. And it is very clearly said that it is an ideal process. The moment you say ideal process, it is not occurring in nature. It is only theoretical. But why do we go for this quasi-static process? It is easy for analysis, where your work producing devices will deliver maximum work. When I say work producing devices, I'm talking about turbine. Turbine will generate work. Okay. So we always want more amount of work. For less money, we want to get good products, right? So similarly, for less investment, I want to get maximum energy. So that is called work output, work producing device. Work absorbing device, compressor. You need a motor to run the compressor. You need electricity to run a compressor. You need electricity to run a pump. Okay. In such devices, I want to give less electricity so that I get maximum advantage out of it. So I supply minimum work so that my electricity bill is less. Okay. If my pump is running where it is costing me about 100 units of electricity, I won't like that pump, right? But if a similar working pump is just costing me 1 unit or 2 unit, then naturally I'll prefer that pump because I want to pay less electricity bill. So work absorbing devices require minimum work in a quasi-static process. And the important or the key word is the standard. Quasi-static process is a standard, a reference. So you can take that as a reference, and this is the maximum limit that can be attained. So let me try to attain that limit. So that is a standard, that is a quasi-static process. And we have said we are attaining equilibrium. What is that equilibrium? That equilibrium is called thermodynamic equilibrium. Okay. So these 5 equilibrium, if it is attained, then it is called thermodynamic equilibrium. Thermal equilibrium, if there is no temperature difference, which means the example in which we have seen inside that cylinder, if all the molecules are possessing the same temperature, then they are all maintained at the same temperature. There is no difference in temperature at all. That is called thermal equilibrium. Mechanical equilibrium, no unbalanced forces. The unbalanced forces, we usually mean pressure. Okay, pressure is force per unit area. Okay, right? So that if there are no unbalanced forces, if the pressure remains the same, then that is called mechanical equilibrium. If the mass of each phase remains the same, ஸ்டார்டிங்ல என்ன மாஸ் இருந்ததோ அதே மாஸ் அப்படியே மெயின்டைன் ஆச்சுன்னா, ஒவ்வொரு ஃபேஸுக்கும் அதே மாதிரி மெயின்டைன் ஆச்சுன்னா, then that is called phase equilibrium. Chemical equilibrium, there is no chemical reaction or chemical decomposition, which means there should not be any change in the chemical composition. Then that is called chemical equilibrium. Internal equilibrium, there should not be any reaction with the surroundings. The system and the surrounding interaction should not cause any change. That is called internal equilibrium. So if a system can have thermal, mechanical, phase, chemical, and internal equilibrium, then that system is said to be in thermodynamic equilibrium state. A very, very important 2-mark question. Sometimes they even ask this for 4 marks. You will be lucky if you get that question in the question paper. So if your system can have thermal, mechanical, phase, chemical, and internal equilibrium, then that system is said to be in thermodynamic equilibrium. Okay. Then we have the 0th law of thermodynamics. Okay. 0th law of thermodynamics, a very, very simple law, very, very easy law. Okay, it is based on the 0th law. The temperature scales are defined. A very simple law. Say I have 3 bodies. I have 3 bodies, A, B, and C. Okay, and all 3 are isolated. I mean, all 3 are separated. Okay, not isolated, they are separated. And if I say A and B are at same temperatures, when I say same temperature, they are in thermal equilibrium because there is no difference in temperature. If A and B are at same temperature, then we can say A and B are in thermal equilibrium. Similarly, A and C are also in thermal equilibrium. Then what can I say? Then I can say B and C. Then I can say B and C is also in thermal equilibrium. Then I can say B and C is also in thermal equilibrium. Very, very simple statement. When a body A is in thermal equilibrium with a body B, and also separately with the body C, which means A and B are in thermal equilibrium and A and C are in thermal equilibrium. Then B and C will also be in thermal equilibrium with each other. Okay, a very simple 2-mark question, but sometimes even students make mistake here. What they will do is, last time when I took class for the previous batch, some of them used to write when state A is in thermal equilibrium with state B and also separately with state C, then states B and C are in thermal equilibrium with each other. Is that correct? No, it is not correct. You can't use the word state. State is a condition of a system. Okay, the moment you say state A and B and C are same, you mean the same system. You are not meaning a different system. Here we are talking about different systems, different bodies. Okay, so A is a different state, a different system, B is a different system, C is a different system, but all of them are in thermal equilibrium with each other. So don't use the word state. The moment you use the word state A, B and C, they are in equilibrium, you are meaning a single system. So don't use that. Use the word body or use the word system. Don't use the word state. If you use the word state, then your zeroth law of thermodynamics is wrong. A very simple law, but many times it has been repeatedly asked in the question paper for a 2-mark question. Okay, a very simple but a very powerful law also. It is based on this, our temperature scales are defined. What do we do when we are sick? We go to the doctor, he uses a thermometer to check our temperature. The thermometer reads a 98.4 degree Fahrenheit, 97 degree Fahrenheit. Nowadays, it is very common. Everybody has got a thermometer, and during this pandemic situation, everyone has got a thermometer. Wherever you go to shop, they use a thermometer. Okay, how it is saying 97 or 98 degree Fahrenheit? How is it able to read? Okay, the sensor is at a particular temperature. Your body is at a particular temperature. If when both of them are attaining the equilibrium temperature, it gives the value as 98.4 or it gives the value as 98, 97 or 100. Depending upon the body temperature, it is able to give you the reading. So it is based on this zeroth law of thermodynamics, our temperature scales are defined. Okay, temperature. Okay, this is a very, very basic terminology, temperature. So people call it a very simple definition, a measure of hotness or coldness. Okay, in your home, now every one of us are at our home. Okay, let's take a chair. Probably in every house nowadays we used plastic chair. Previously in every home, even in my childhood days, we used to have steel chairs at home. Okay, metal chairs. Okay, when you have a metal chair and wooden chair at home, okay, or maybe nowadays if you have a metal cot in your room or in your home, you can touch that. And if you have a plastic chair, you can touch that. Both of them are at room temperatures, right? When two different materials are there at room and the room temperature is a 30 degrees centigrade, whatever object is in the room should also be at 30 degrees centigrade because everyone will be at equilibrium in that room, correct? But when you touch a metal cart and if you feel it, you will feel it colder than the wooden chair or plastic chair. Okay, that is because that the metal chair has got a lower temperature and the wooden chair has got a higher temperature? Can we say that? Is it like that? Can anyone of you respond to this question? When a metal chair feels colder than a wooden chair, is the metal chair at a lower temperature than that of a wooden chair? So can anyone tell me?
So it may be because the metal is said to be a conductor, so it is feeling colder.
Okay, that may be a reason, but what I'm saying is, say the room temperature is 30 degrees centigrade. You are touching the metal chair. You're feeling it colder. If you are touching the wooden chair, it seems to be a little bit warmer. So can we say that the wooden chair is at 30 degrees centigrade and the metal chair maybe 25 degrees centigrade? Will it be like that? Did you understand my question?
Sir, it's actually due to thermal conductivity of the metals.
Okay, that is fine. Thermal conductivity of the metal. My question is, will the metal chair be at 25 and the wooden chair is at 30, or both of them will be at 30?
Both of them are 30.
Then why do I feel the metal chair colder than the wooden chair? That may be because of its thermal conductivity or whatever property. Okay, that is because of the property of that particular metal. Okay, but earlier days, when we don't have this temperature probe, when we don't have this temperature measuring devices, we tend to feel that the metal chair is at a lower temperature than that of a wooden chair. Okay, so in English they have statement like this: appearances are often deceptive. Okay, like when you have a feel, you can't say that whether it is right or wrong. By just feeling it, you can't say whether it is right or wrong. Okay, what you need to know is whether it is really at a lower temperature or at a higher temperature. That is very, very important. Okay, so we can't say temperature as simply hardness or coldness. That is what I am trying to make you understand. Okay, now how do I measure temperature? Though it is a degree of hotness or coldness, by feeling it, we will not be able to measure the temperature. You know that temperature has got a specific value because it is a property. Any property should have a specific value. So how do I measure temperature? Okay, when we measure temperature, just like I said, the metal chair feels colder because it has got some property that makes it cold or feel like being cold. Okay, several properties of materials, they change. Okay, when with respect to temperature. Okay, I have given you some examples. See, I have given you 6 examples. Constant volume gas thermometer. It works on the variation in pressure. Okay, just take your simple thermometer, the thermometer which the doctors use. Okay, now we have got digital thermometers. Previously, we used to have this uh, mercury in glass thermometer. You have mercury in the bulb of the thermometer, and when it is put in a hot liquid, okay, the bulb senses the temperature and the mercury will expand. Okay, so that is the expansion, volumetric expansion of mercury, because mercury has a property that when the temperature of the mercury raises, its volume also increases. So volume varies proportionally with respect to temperature in case of mercury, and people call that as thermal expansion. Okay, you would have heard this: thermal expansion, coefficient of thermal expansion. Coefficient of thermal expansion for mercury is greater. Okay, so if I'm able to measure temperature based on the expansion of mercury, then that thermal expansion becomes a thermometric property. Okay, in case of a constant volume gas thermometer, okay, your constant volume gas thermometer, the next class I'll show you the picture of the constant volume gas thermometer. Okay, okay, so what happens is it also has got a bulb. So the moment it is put in a hot place, the pressure inside the constant volume gas thermometer increases if the temperature is large, and it decreases if the temperature is less. So if you are able to measure temperature based on pressure, then that pressure is called a thermometric property. So your constant volume gas thermometer works on pressure. Thermistor and thermal resistance thermometer, electrical resistance. So in some cases, okay, when you raise the temperature, the coefficient of resistance that will increase. In some cases, the coefficient of resistance will decrease with increase in temperature. Okay, so if the resistance is the property by which temperature is measured, then we can go for thermistor and resistance thermometer. Thermocouple, you would have been familiar, you would have studied this in physics, Seebeck effect. When two dissimilar metals, they make a junction, okay, and two sets of junction, and if you place those two set of junctions, one junction at a colder place and another junction at a hotter place, you will have EMF induced in that circuit. Okay, so if you are able to measure temperature based on the EMF induced, then that is called a thermocouple. Total radiation pyrometer and optical pyrometers, those are used in furnaces, okay, where you can't get into the furnace to calculate temperature, or you can't use your regular temperature probes, because if you use your regular temperature probes, they will also melt in the heat produced in the furnace. So total radiation pyrometer, they will keep it in a distance. They will measure the radiation. Radiation will fall on a particular lens, and it will be able to predict what is the temperature there. Optical pyrometer, you will have a bulb. You have to look through the bulb. The filament of the bulb, if it vanishes before the flame of the furnace, then they will say that the filament and the furnace, both of them are at the same brightness. If the filament is very bright or if the filament is light, then it is not giving you the correct answer. The moment your filament disappears before the brightness of the furnace, then you will be able to read the temperature. So if you are able to measure temperature based on the brightness of the filament, then it is called optical pyrometer. Now, all these you need not understand the working principle. What I'm trying to say is, see, so by measuring pressure or thermal expansion or electrical resistance or EMF induced radiation or brightness, if you are able to measure temperature, then that makes it a temperature scale. And these properties which are used to measure temperature are called thermometric properties. Okay, so we have got temperature scales. Okay, before proceeding into temperature scales, there are some simple definitions which you can note down. Ice point, the temperature at which a mixture of ice and water are in equilibrium at a pressure of 1 atmosphere. Okay, and this ice point is nothing but the freezing point of water. The freezing point of water, which is 0 degrees centigrade. Okay, your ice point is actually 0 degrees centigrade. Okay, and similarly steam point, the temperature at which water vapor condenses at a pressure of 1 atmosphere. Your steam point is the temperature at which your steam gets generated. So that is 100 degrees centigrade. Okay, these 2 points are the references. Ice point and steam point are the references which we'll be using for measuring the temperatures or for generating temperature scales. Okay, because ice point, we know your water turns into ice at 0 and your water turns into vapor at 100. So ice point and steam point, we are familiar. So the moment water turns into ice, we will be able to say, okay, the temperature has attained 0. The moment water turns into vapor, we will be able to say it has reached 100 degrees centigrade at normal atmospheric pressure. That also you should keep in mind, because if the pressure falls or decreases, accordingly the ice point and steam point can change. Okay, so 2 point scales. If you look at centigrade scale, 0 degree and 100 degree, that is the ice point and the steam point. 32 degree Fahrenheit, 212 degree Fahrenheit. So 32 is the ice point, 212 is the steam point. So these are the 2 point scales where they keep the temperature scales or measure the temperature scales based on the ice point and steam point. But when you look at Kelvin scale, the Kelvin scale is dependent only on one reference point. Okay, it is dependent only on one non-zero reference point, and that non-zero reference point is needed to assign the establish the slope of the linear scale. Okay, what is the lowest temperature? The lowest temperature is 0 Kelvin. So 1 point is already known, and what you need is only one non-zero reference point. So that gives you the Kelvin scale. Okay, okay, this what is the time now? So it is 11:20. So the next part we will see in the next class. Okay, so we will stop it here. So now if you have any doubts, you can ask me. So whatever we have learned so far, you can ask me any doubts that you have now. So any doubts that you have, you can ask me now. No doubts? So nowadays I have become so good in taking lecture. Everybody understands.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, in the Kelvin scale, you said the slope of linear scale, the last point, sir.
Yes, yes. You
What does it mean, sir? Slope of the linear scale.
see, Okay, just a minute. So can you see the screen? Okay, so can you see the screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Just a minute. See, whenever we have this x and y axis, okay, normally when you have x and y, to draw a line, okay, you require at least 2 points, right? Is that correct? You require
Yes,
at
sir.
least 2 points to draw a line. Okay, in Kelvin scale, what we have is 0 as one of the point. So I'll write it here. I'll show it here. So 1 point is absolute 0. So 0 Kelvin is 1 point. Okay. So now what I require is I just require another point. That's all. Okay. 0 Kelvin is not 0 degree centigrade. You have to be clear with that. When I say 0 Kelvin is not the ice point. 273 Kelvin is the ice point. Is that clear? So when I say 0 Kelvin is 1 point, and I just require only one another temperature. And if I have one another temperature, now I will be able to draw a line. So if I'm able to draw a line and I already have 0 Kelvin, I require just one more point to establish a temperature scale. So in case of say your centigrade scale, okay, so this is say 0 degree centigrade, and say this point is 100 degree centigrade. Okay, I require 2 points. Or if it is a Fahrenheit scale, you require 2 points, 22 degree Fahrenheit, 32 degree Fahrenheit and 212 degree Fahrenheit. Whereas in a Kelvin scale, one point is already fixed at 0, and the other point alone I need to know. So if I know the other point alone, now I will be able to generate a Kelvin scale. And
Yes, sir.
for a line, it is usually a linear scale. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So we will be discussing much more. So don't worry, even if you're not able to get it fully. The next class, we will be discussing this much in detail. Okay. Okay. Anything else?
Sir, about the metal chair and wooden chair.
Which one?
The metal chair and wooden chair temperature difference.
Yes, yes. Has, go ahead.
So that's what I didn't understand it completely.
See, what I wanted to say from that example is metal chair may feel colder and the wooden chair may feel warmer. But in reality, both of them are actually at original temperatures only. They are at the same temperatures. They are at the same temperatures, but it feels in a different way. So just by having a feeling, you will not be able to say one is at a lower temperature and another one is at a higher temperature. If you measure it with a thermometric device, both of them will read the same temperature. That is what I was trying to tell you. Did you get my point?
Yes, sir. Yes.
See, both of them will feel differently, but actually both of them are at the same temperature. So when I say temperature is a measure of hotness or coldness, that definition is not actually a proper definition. That is what I am trying to tell you. So it is not simply a degree of hotness or degree of coldness, because the metal chair seems to be colder than the wooden chair. So the definition that the degree of hotness or coldness does not get established in case of metal chair and a wooden chair example. So that is why I told you, by simply feeling something, you will not be able to measure or determine temperature. That is what I wanted to tell you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good.
Sir, why is that actually cold? Like, why does that feel cold?
That may be because of the thermal conductivity. See, if you would have done this in your mechanical sciences, Q equal to Ka into dt by dx. Okay, so normally the thermal conductivity of metal is higher. Okay, so it will be able to conduct heat very quickly. And in a real sense, actually, if you even when you say thermal conductivity and all, okay, but the characteristics of metal is like that.
Okay.
The characteristics of metal is like that. But anyhow, I'll just explore much on that. Okay,
Okay,
I'll
sir.
say why it is like that.
Okay.
Because the temperature is the same. There is no doubt about it. The temperature is the same, but
Yes.
why it feels colder, we have to. I'm not able to give you a very precise answer. I'll
Okay.
give you the next lecture. Okay.
Okay, sir.
The
So does
temperature
this
is
also apply when like if someone has fever, if it has them, there's a temperature difference between like feel it is hot or cold. Like
yes.
is that the temperature or some other properties?
No, that is temperature. What we are saying is by simply looking at the feeling, we will not be able to say it. For example, that is why we took that example.
Okay,
In
sir.
a generic sense, temperature is a degree of hotness or coldness, but that definition cannot be applied everywhere.
Okay, sir.
It is not applicable in all situations. That is what we are trying to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but actually, it is feeling colder. It should be lesser in temperature, no, sir?
Maybe you can try. I haven't tried it. Maybe we have to try it. We have to check it with the help of a thermometer or some other temperature probing device. We have to try and see.
Okay, sir.
Now, unless we do it on your own, we will not be able to conclude it, right?
Yes, sir.
No, I haven't done it. That's why I'm telling you openly. I haven't done it. So I will have to check it out. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Anyhow, because most of you are asking it, I'll also go and look back once again and see what do they mean much more in it. I'll just go in depth and see, and I'll try to clarify all your doubts. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Sir, just a small
Yes.
question.
Yeah.
So you said quasi-static process is considered a reference for other processes, right, sir?
Yeah, it is considered as a reference because we are able to attain equilibrium everywhere.
So it's
Why
a
we are able to
process,
attain
then how come it's considered as a reference?
it is not?
It's a theoretical process only, no, sir? Then
Yes,
how come
yes,
it can
yes.
be used as a
Yes, of
reference?
course. Of course. See, what is the maximum mark in your question paper? 75.
Yes, sir.
Do we get 75 all the time? We don't get 75 all the time, but 75 is the maximum mark. That is the limit, right? But nobody is surely not going to get above 75.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct? Okay, so
Yes.
75 is the limit, but what we do is we try and get as much as we can. So similarly, quasi-static process, it doesn't exist in nature. So we keep that as the slab. We keep that as the reference. Let me try and achieve as much as I can. I'm surely not going to attain that quasi-static process. But only when I have that reference, okay, if someone comes and tell me I'm going to have a process which is better than the quasi-static process, I can easily tell him that he's a cheat, he's a fraud. It is not going to happen because quasi-static process itself is not attainable. So we keep that as the reference and we try to have a process which is very close to the quasi-static process. That is what we are trying to do.
Okay.
The other thing why we do that is to make calculations simple. To keep the analysis simple, we take quasi-static process as the reference. That is why we should have something as reference, right? We should have something as a standard. Okay,
Yes,
so
sir.
that is why we have quasi-static process as a reference.
Okay.
Okay, I'm happy that so many people are listening and it actually keeps me motivated. So do we have any other doubts?
Sir, can you explain the phase equilibrium also?
Which one?
Phase equilibrium.
Sorry, I'm not able to hear you.
Phase equilibrium, sir.
Can you please be a little bit louder?
Phase equilibrium, sir.
Phase equilibrium. Phase equilibrium is nothing but, see, suppose when the process started, I had 2 kg of water and 1 kg of vapor in a system. Okay, as the process continues, if the 2 kg of water is still water and 1 kg of vapor is still vapor, then that is said to be phase equilibrium. While during the process, the 2 kg of water should not become 1.5 kg of water and 1.5 kg of vapor. If that happens, then there is no phase equilibrium. Okay, the 2 kg of water should remain as 2 kg of water and 1 kg of vapor should remain as 1 kg of vapor. Then that is called as phase equilibrium.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Okay, guys. So if at all you have some doubts, note it down. I'll clarify that in the next class. Okay. Because I have one another work at 11:30. So let me close the session. I think Gautam has got a doubt. Keep note it down, Gautam. In the beginning of the next class, I'll start with Gautam. Okay. Please don't feel bad. I just have to close this call because I have one another meeting at 11:30.
It's okay,
Okay?
sir. No problem, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. We will meet on Monday by 2 p.m.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you,
Fine.
sir.
I'm closing the session. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.